Hello and welcome to episode 325 of Hot Media with Bob Mann. This one is entitled Holy Cow, Baseball's Best Broadcasters. Today is a special day for me. It always is every single year. I've had the good fortune to have season tickets to the New York Yankees. And whether it's the weather or my schedule, it always works out, or almost always works out, that I can be there for opening day. And as I record this on Friday, April 8th, as soon as I'm done, I'm ready to jump in the car with my wife and head across the George Washington Bridge from northern New Jersey into the Bronx to see the Yankees opener against the Boston Red Sox. Now, on Hot Media, every week we discuss the nation's hottest media content and the hottest controversies in mass media, but we have dealt with sports. But this one is meant to be pure fun. It's a monologue in which I just talk about my feelings about baseball's best broadcasters. Now, I know that a podcast, whether it's the audio on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and we just had a little blackout with my camera right there. But for whatever that is, we're still rolling. And so the whole idea is that sports media is a key element of media. And I want to talk more about it as time goes on. But this is a very special day. Anyway, what I was going to mention is before the black hit the screen, is that a podcast goes out to the whole world. And I have to admit right off the bat that I have a lot of local prejudice in this case for the New York market. As I said, we're in northern New Jersey, and we are greatly influenced, totally influenced pretty much, by New York City and when it comes to media, sports, entertainment. So the New York Yankees and the New York Mets are certainly going to get a lot more play. So I would ask you, that if you're in any other part of the country or any other part of the world and you have a favorite broadcaster for baseball, please tell me about it. Write to me at profmann53@gmail.com, PROFMANN 53 at gmail.com, because I don't want to leave anybody out, because just like a 60s and 70s oldies music show I recently got to host on a local radio station here, the way that the songs bring back memories, so do the voices of these broadcasters. As a matter of fact, baseball play-by-play broadcasters, especially those on the radio, have been referred to as the soundtrack of our summers. And so on this episode, in this monologue, I want to talk about, number one, what I consider the three best calls of all time. Because a play-by-play broadcaster has to be excited. Not so excited that they lose any journalistic edge or they're just screaming, but excited, and very often that excitement lasts through the ages. One of the ones I'm going to mention goes all the way back to 1951. I'm also going to talk about the three people who I consider to be the best play-by-play broadcasters of all time. Then I'm going to talk about the best teams. I don't mean the MLB teams on the field. I mean teams of broadcasters. The play-by-play person and the analyst, which used to be called the color commentator, sometimes still goes by that term. Not a sidekick, because they're a very valuable part of the broadcast. And very often that analyst is either a former player or a reporter who has covered the team for years. And then finally, the biggest characters, because of the fact that I named the episode Holy Cow, Baseball's Best Broadcasters. Well, that's because here in the New York market, we associate Holy Cow with Phil Rizzuto, former shortstop and longtime broadcaster of the Yankees, but actually the first person, if you're out in Chicago, you'll know this, to pretty much lock up the phrase Holy Cow was Harry Carey. So let's talk about the greatest calls of all time. For copyright reasons, I can't play them, but anybody who's a real baseball fan, whether you like the old New York baseball giants, the current San Francisco Giants, you know about the shot heard around the world. Bobby Thompson hits a home run in an old school playoff series No divisions in 1951. The Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants, both New York City National League teams, tied for first at the end of the season. They're playing the best 2 out of 3. The Giants are down in their home ballpark, the Polo Grounds in Manhattan. And yes, Manhattan actually did have a baseball stadium. As a matter of fact, the Mets even started there. The Yankees played there before the old Yankee Stadium was built. But it was basically the home of the New York baseball Giants. So the Giants are down in the 9th inning, 4-2. The Dodgers bring in one of their best pitchers, Ralph Branca, and Thompson hits a pennant-winning home run. Russ Hodges, the play-by-play announcer for the Dodgers on radio, where people can't see the action, which makes, of course, the radio play-by-play person much more important than a television play-by-play person. He just starts screaming, "The Giants win the pennant! The Giants win the pennant! The Giants win the pennant!" Well, it's insanely partisan, but it is classic. People know it to this day. As old as I am, I hadn't been born when this happened, and totally crushed the spirits of the Brooklyn Dodger fans, not as much as them moving, but certainly was probably the greatest single moment in the history of the New York baseball Giants before they moved to San Francisco. For me, and we all, just like with music, like with rock and roll, like with the songs of the 60s and 70s, we have our own personal experiences. And I was lucky enough to be at David Cohn's Perfect Game in July of 1999. So I didn't hear this live. I saw the game live. Much better, obviously. But John Sterling, who is the voice of the Yankees, and he's in all of our categories here, or most of them. He's down as a member of one of the best teams, but he's also down as one of the biggest characters. And John Sterling summed it up really quickly. Of course, he had the previous season and had David Wells's Perfect Game, but the words were almost exactly the same. And you never know when a perfect game might be coming. There's only been 20 some odd perfect games in the history of Major League Baseball. And it was 27 up, 27 down, baseball immortality for David Cohn. And that pretty much summed it up. Because a perfect game, nobody gets on base for any reason, not even an error, not a walk. And so it is so rare that certainly if you pitch one, you have baseball immortality. But to just sum it up, 27 up, 27 down, baseball immortality for David Cohn. Now, this is a non-New York announcer. I'm about to mention Jack Buck. Jack Buck, the father of the great, successful, current play-by-play national voice, Joe Buck. He was doing CBS radio in 1988. The LA Dodgers were playing the Oakland Athletics in the World Series, Game 1. And Kirk Gibson was a player who was toward the end of his career, but still very powerful, but he had a very bad leg injury, and he literally hobbled to home plate. He ran the count full, and he hits a game-winning home run. Dodgers went on to win that World Series. And Jack Buck, working with Bill White, whose name is going to come up a little bit later, he just simply said what he felt. "I don't believe what I just saw. I don't believe what I just saw." But he had the professionalism to first, since he was on the radio, tell people, "Hey, this is what just happened. The ball went out. It's a home run. The Dodgers win the game." But then he admits his true feelings. "I don't believe what I just saw. A man who was totally hobbled, who they thought would not play in that game at all, comes up in a pinch-hitting situation in the bottom of the 9th and hits a game-winning home run and literally limps around the bases." It was a heroic moment for Gibson as a player. He's the one who did it. But for Buck, one of the greatest calls in play-by-play history. Now, to the next section. The best play-by-play announcers of all time. Well, I'm going to lean very heavily New York here. And you can say, well, you have Vin Scully on that list, and I do. But Vin Scully started here. Vin Scully was the voice of the Brooklyn Dodgers before he went with the team to Los Angeles at the end of the 1957 season to start in 1958. And, of course, in LA is where he really made his fame, and he could paint a word picture for you, and he knew how to be on television without telling you the obvious, and he has a spectacular voice. I said had, past tense, only because he's retired. And most people would probably vote Vin Scully as the best play-by-play announcer of all time. But the two best, in my opinion, play-by-play announcers in New York were both Southern voices. Voices from the very deep South, Alabama, Mississippi. Mel Allen, who had just graduated from law school, and he had also done Alabama football, not easy to say, Alabama football, on the radio as a college student and as a law student. But he went to New York and he got on CBS, and his career became broadcasting, and he became literally the voice of the New York Yankees. Nobody really knows the reason and the controversy that led to Mel being fired after the 1964 season. But when cable TV came in and games started to move to regional cable, Mel came back. And he even was the play-by-play announcer for Dave Righetti's 1983 no-hitter at the old Yankee Stadium. Red Barber, a very interesting man, very literate, and he had been the voice of the Brooklyn Dodgers. He was the one who pretty much discovered and brought along young Vin Scully. But the story with Red Barber was that he did not get along with Walter O'Malley, the owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers, who moved them to L.A. He went over to the Yankees. And Red Barber, who also worked on CBS Radio, NPR, he had a very varied career. He took sportscasting to new directions in terms of commentary. But Red Barber, the Yankees, and listen, I've just said I'm a crazed Yankee fan. I'm not wearing my Yankee paraphernalia here because of the fact that it would give me hat head on TV, but I even have my Yankee COVID mask here. So I definitely am a Yankee fanatic, but I admit when they have hit the rocks, that in 1966, before divisions, they finished 10th in a 10-team American League. It was pathetic. And there was a rainy weekday doubleheader in late September that was the end of their season. And in the old Yankee Stadium, before it was renovated, when it fit 67,000 people, had a crowd of less than 1,000. And Red Barber said to the director, I want you to pan around. I want you to have your cameras just simply pan the stands and show the demise of this once great franchise. Of course, he got fired for it. But Red Barber will live on forever as one of the great play-by-play announcers. One of the things he used to say on the air on radio in New York, if the Dodgers had the bases loaded, he'd say the bases are full of Brooklyns. And he had his own way. And it was just interesting that two men from the Deep South who did not change to having the traditional broadcaster voice, kept their regional accents, were the voices of New York baseball for so many years. Now, best teams. I recently made reference to Bill White, former ball player, played for the St. Louis Cardinals. Actually, the Cardinals would beat the Yankees in the 1964 World Series. He became a broadcaster with the Yankees in 1971, not a Yankee, but he became a beloved member of the Yankee family because he broadcast Yankee baseball for 18 years, through mediocre years, bad years, and great years, up through the World Championships in the late 70s. And he worked together with Phil Rizzuto. Now, Phil Rizzuto is in the big character category. Rizzuto wore his heart in his sleeve. He was on the George Washington Bridge back to his home in New Jersey in the seventh inning, and he openly admitted it. Anybody who sent in a calzone, a cannoli, anybody who sent him a gift, he'd mention them on the air. He talked about birthdays. He was just great. White was the ultimate professional, but he found Rizzuto to be very funny. And the back and forth between them, the way that White could bait Rizzuto into saying certain ridiculous things, it was marvelous to listen to for years. Now, I mentioned John Sterling and his call of Cohn's Perfect Game. Well, I love the combination of John Sterling and Susan Waldman, and many people don't realize just how much Susan Waldman is part of sports broadcasting history. Number one, she was the very first voice in 1987 heard on All Sports Radio WFAN. It had switched over. It had been a country station, WHN. And they did the Mets, and they decided to try all sports. They later took over WNBC, moved down the frequency, added an FM. But this was a real experiment by Emmis Communication in those days, and Susan was the first voice. She became WFAN's Yankee beat reporter, and in 2005 went on the air with John Sterling, and her microphone from that day on WCBS Radio is in the Baseball Hall of Fame. because of the fact that she is considered by most historians to be the first female to be in a regular day-to-day broadcast team in Major League Baseball. And they have a rapport that's back and forth, which is somewhat corny. And again, even if you're as old as I am, born in the 1950s, some of John Sterling's references to songs are very pre-rock and roll and out of 1940s musicals, but they're just part of being a Yankee fan. But the winners, and as a Yankee fan, I don't like to admit this, but the winners are the TV team for the New York Mets. Gary Cohn, Keith Hernandez, and Ron Darling. Together, even though as a Yankee fan, you don't want the Mets to win, but you still will occasionally watch the Mets. They're funny. They're insightful. They know their roles. And Keith Hernandez had a great quote. He was told early on in his broadcasting career, he's a great Mets first baseman. His number is going to be retired this year. But he was told, be funny in this role as the so-called color commentator analyst, but don't be a clown. And he knows how to be funny, how to be witty, but never cross that line into being a clown. And so I have to hand it to the team from Queens. Their team of Cohn, Hernandez, and Darling probably are the best when it comes to a team of broadcasters of baseball. Now, the biggest characters, we mentioned them all. Harry Carey, he was with the St. Louis Cardinals later on in Chicago, and he would, at Wrigley Field, be the one who got on the PA system and sang Take Me Out to the Ball Game, something I just learned to play on the piano. And he was just a lover of whatever team he was behind. He was a huge character with huge glasses to match the personality. And I know that in the Midwest, he is revered. Phil Rizzuto, I already told you why he was such a character and why people loved him. The cannolis, the birthdays, the leaving early, being able to be drawn into anything by his broadcast partner, Bill White. And finally, John Sterling. John Sterling's home run calls can be downright cringeworthy. You know, sometimes Robinson Cano used to be with the Yankees, and it would be, Robinson Cano, don't you know? Aaron Judge hits a home run, and it's, all rise, here comes the Judge. Here comes the Judge is a reference that was resurrected in 1968 on Laugh-In because it used to be in vaudeville years before that. Most people who are watching or listening to baseball today don't even know what vaudeville is. But nonetheless, you listen for the home runs, and anytime the Yankees get a new member of the roster, that is what you think of right off the bat. What will Sterling's home run call be for this guy? As a matter of fact, I think as he tries to speak Italian on Giancarlo Stanton, who is not Italian, he doesn't even have the language correct. But nonetheless, we get used to it, and we love it, and it's part of what it is. And so that's just a brief 20-minute summary called Holy Cow, Baseball's Best Broadcasters. I do ask you, if you do have another idea, especially from another market, to be in contact with me, profman53 at gmail.com, PROFMANN53 at gmail.com. And of course, you can find out everything about this podcast. Normally every week on this podcast, we discuss the nation's hottest controversies and hottest new content in mass media. So what you can do is I can just put up some of the banners here for those of you watching the video on YouTube. You can just go to Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter. My handle at Bob Mann Media, BOBMANN Media, and to get everything, including archives, on the website www.bobmanhotmedia.com. Man spelled with two N's. And that's it for this episode. It's fun to do a monologue every once in a while. I think more fun to have the conversation with the guests. We vary things back and forth. We jump from journalism back to entertainment. It's actually always the most fun when we do sports, but especially today, opening day for Yankee fans. Other teams opened yesterday. Yanks are supposed to open yesterday. A lot of things are different in baseball this year. Higher technology in terms of catchers, being able to touch a wristband and be able to give an electronic signal for the next pitch to the pitcher, and the umpire is sounding much more like NFL refs, not having that 1986 cell phone bag come out and putting on headphones like these, but just having an earpiece, listening, and then turning on their mic to say the ruling on the field has been overruled. The Washington Nationals retain their challenge. I saw that one last night for the first time. So I'd like to hear about your favorite sports broadcaster, and I'd like you to really enjoy the season of Major League Baseball here that we really didn't think we were going to get in 2022. It's the first true season all the way through. Well, it still had a mess, didn't it? Beside COVID, we had a lockout that did knock out that first week, but it looked like it was going to knock out more than a month. So great to be back in action. And please stay with us for all of the other media subjects right here every week on Hot Media. Thank you very much for watching and listening.